national selection taking place last week, but really the rest of the country, the majority of the country is waiting on this selection process. What can you tell us from Nyeri?
A very good morning to you from Nyeri County, and like you said, today we expect to see county schools and sub-county schools actually do their selection today. And where I am at the Nyeri National Youth Polytechnic, where, as you can see, principals and school heads are actually streaming in this particular hall, where the process is expected to start at any time now. And what we are seeking to understand today is whether some of the changes that have been proposed can actually be actualized, and what is going to be the effect of these particular changes in this particular region. But what I can say is that in the past we saw a number of students actually being taken up, and so we expect that the numbers, of course, to increase this coming year with the free primary education. And we also expect that with the government policy of implementing, making sure that every single student who sat for their KCPE can actually get a slot in the Form 1 classes, we expect the numbers to go up. And I'll be speaking with the chair of the principals to just give us his thoughts or his insight into the same, to help us understand if they feel that some of these changes are going to be effective. Kindly, sir, if you can join me here. A very good morning to you.
Good morning.
So kindly just introduce yourself and tell us, as heads of schools, what do you expect from this particular session today?
Okay, thank you very much. My name is James Gashara, Principal Gaki Secondary School and chairperson of Kesha Nyeri. And we are here for the Form 1 selection 20, I don't know whether to call it 2018, Form 1s of 2018, but we are doing it in 2017. For one, we highly appreciate the ministry's efforts to ensure that this selection is done early enough, because for one, that is going to save a lot of teaching time for the Form 1s. Previously, they used to start school in February, but this time around they will be starting in January, actually early January, and that will ensure adequate syllabus coverage for them by the time they are in Form 4.
All right. And sir, if I may ask, do you expect as a principal the numbers of the Form 1s to actually go up due to the changes that have been made by the government? And do you feel as schools that you have adequate resources or infrastructure to actually accommodate the large numbers expected to be joining Form 1?
Thank you. I would say that one, because the government has already declared education, especially day school, free, that is about to attract more students to join Form 1. And as far as infrastructure is concerned, we are not badly off, especially in Nyeri. I would say even last year we had the capacity to absorb all those who did KCPE. And now with those new initiatives, the numbers are about to be higher. The only challenge we are actually about to face is teachers, because it is an open fact that we have a shortage of teachers. This is not just an issue of a central region or Nyeri, it is a countrywide issue. But luckily, from what we are getting from the press, the government is addressing the issue, and we hope that with the long run, we shall not have that problem.
Okay, and maybe finally, we saw the government say that they're going to be providing textbooks to students. Do you feel that this is a move that will actually help equalize education for the students, or do you feel that this is probably a wrong move?
It is a right move, because it is a way of ensuring that we have adequate resources in the schools, and anything that is going to ensure adequate resources is welcome. We are still waiting for more details about the implementation, because what we have been told, or what we have been made to understand, is that that initiative is only catering for Form 1s and only for a number of subjects. So we are yet to get details about what will happen to the other subjects in Form 1 and the other classes where the ratio may not be 1-to-1.
All right, and before I let you go, in the past, we've seen a lot of cases involving theft of books in schools, but we've also seen a lot of questions being raised in terms of admission of students to schools. Sometimes we've had principals being accused of showing favor and things like that. Do you think that such a system or such a program as this today will help make sure that the whole process of actually selecting is not shambolic and it is not, it's actually within the confines of the law?
Thank you. One, I want to say that as a principal, I don't think we have been practicing malpractice in as far as admission is concerned. The issue actually comes from parents themselves. From the time that selection was computerized, we actually follow the list that is given to us by the ministry. But if for some reason a parent might have the son or daughter admitted in a school A, and for some reason they are not happy with the school A, so they would want that child to go to school B. You see, that creates a vacancy in school A, and during the time of second selection, that vacancy will have to be filled. So I don't see a lot of many principals who have been practicing nepotism on that matter.
Thank you very much, and all the best in your endeavors today. All right, that is what is happening here in Nyeri, and like you've heard, we expect a challenge when it comes to the number of teachers because obviously with the government policy, the numbers of students who are going to be joining Form 1s are expected to be bloated or higher than last year, and so we hope that the ministry will move with speed to ensure that the students who actually move to the schools actually are able to be taught. And I must emphasize that because we've seen in the conference that was held here this week in Nyeri, one of the key things that the researchers who actually held that conference said is that we have seen our children go to school, but very little learning is taking place, and therefore moves to ensure that the students who actually go to school, even with the free secondary education implementation, will not just go to school, but will actually benefit from the process of school and learning in the institutions that they will be joining. Back to you in studio. I will keep following this in Nyeri County. Martin Munene.
Thanks, Martin. So joining me in studio to discuss this is right next to me Amos Kaburu. He is an education expert. In the middle is Steve Gikonyo. He is a business consultant and political strategist. And at the very end of our table this morning, Danson Omari. He is a lawyer. Joy Mudivo will be joining us a little later. So good morning to you all.
Good morning.
And welcome. So Amos, let me begin with you. We're talking about 63% of our children and where they end up. And most of them do end up, of course, in these county and sub-county schools. Yeah. But there's always a lot of hue and cry from parents feeling that their kids didn't go to the right school, that they scored better and should have been, put in a different school, in a national school, etc. So let's start with criteria. What goes into this selection?
Thank you so much, Anne. It's important to understand that the main issue is the categorization of schools. And I will start by the solution, which is if you standardize all the schools, then no one will be worried of where you go to. A few years ago, when we had 6 universities, nobody cared which university you went to. Unless you're doing medicine, it's only you either want to go to Moi or go to the University of Nairobi. So the challenge we have is a categorization of schools, which is a very, very elitist approach that even the very national schools that we have, about 102, not all of them, people look at all of them as the same. So if you told a parent in Nairobi that your daughter is going to Nyabururu Girls or is going to Lugulu Girls as a national school, and the neighbor is going to Kenya High, there will be a feeling that the one going to Kenya High is joining a better school.
They want to go to the original.
Yes. So there is this idea of the elitist in terms of their national schools. Then below that we have what we call the extra county schools. So the national schools are supposed to get children across the country to represent the face of Kenya from the 47 counties. And this year what we have is we have an equity model that allows that even the best performers in sub-counties, the former districts, also get an opportunity. So you'll go maybe to a sub-county like Lari in Kiambu, where children performed very, very well. And so you'll get that for you to qualify to go to a national school, even maybe you need around 430 marks. So they will have selected all the 400 marks, and then they will no longer have any slot. But maybe you go to a sub-county like Turkana West, and the best had scored 360 marks. So the boy and the girl will still be given an opportunity to join the national schools. So that's how national schools are done. This year we had above 9,000 children who scored above 400 marks, but we have slots in national schools that come to about 23,000. So we have an addition of 14,000 children who didn't score 400 marks, but on this equity model, which is distributed depending on performance per county and the slots, who ended up getting the slots in the national schools. Then we have the so-called the extra county schools. Previously, they used to be called provincial schools. And these are schools which are supposed to take 80% of the children from that particular county where they are based, and then source for 20% of the children outside that particular county. Then below that, we have what we now call the county schools, which are now supposed to source 100% of the children from those particular counties. And then lastly, we have got the so-called the sub-county schools, which are often neglected, the so-called the day schools. So that's usually what happens. The main criteria is around marks, but unfortunately also the schools follow resources. If you look at this country, we have about 70% of the resources actually accumulated around national schools. So it means that the remaining 30% of the resources in this country are shared by the other schools, extra county, county, and sub-county schools, which is quite unfortunate. In fact, when you look at these 100% transition and the 6 billion that were released, if you look at the unit cost of coming up with a classroom, that will only give you about 2,300 schools. Now, there are about 9,000 public secondary schools in Kenya, which are supposed to absorb almost 1 million. So you're talking about every school is supposed to absorb almost 1,000. That's no mean. I mean about 100. That means it's a serious work, because some of these day schools could only maybe have capacity of about 30. But then you're also talking about other things such as toilets, talking about laboratories, or talking about libraries. But most fundamental are the service providers who are teachers. So the criteria, as we've said, is all about marks, and then how the ministry works on the equity model to distribute the positions.
I'll talk about categorization later and how that affects resource allocation, infrastructure, and really if you have the bulk of the children going to the schools, then where should the bulk of the money be going? Let's enter that debate later, but Steve, give me your thoughts. First of all, what kind of school did you go to? Did you go to a national school? Did you go to a county school? Did you go to a sub-county school?
I don't think we had that when
what did you have in your day?
I went to a local school in the city of Nairobi, and so we didn't have those, at least as far as I was concerned.
It wasn't
anything that really mattered. Of course, we had the alliances and the Nairobi schools and so on, the elite schools. And, you can't put that away from them, because they have a history. And a lot of people who are leading governments today and others leading business went through those schools.
And so
therefore, as the alumnus, they would want those schools to still...
There comes in the pride. Now we can guess which school you went to. Okay, but just poking fun this morning. Your thoughts on this selection, and it does have, of course, more families than not anxious about where their kids go and how this will affect their prospects going forward.
I think we see parents struggling with transition. Here's a child that you've nurtured all these years, and now they're going away to some far-off place. What Amos spoke about, infrastructure, is what I would focus on. Standardizing the schools so that it doesn't matter where you go. Of course, there are other issues. If you're in the city, you don't have as much dust, you don't use pit latrines, etc., etc. It makes a big difference. But even those things help to develop the individual. Regardless of where they go through, it helps to develop them. So it's not all bad that a child has to go, far away, or to a school that is in a remote area, like the example he gave, a name I've never heard. But the key thing is infrastructure. Are they getting the same quality of education that they would get in other schools? Are the teachers coming to school drunk, or are they held to account and they come and actually teach? Are they tested so that we see, which teachers are performing best wherever they are? And also aptitude tests for the teachers also. How well are your students doing? Are they actually learning, not just passing tests and so on? So that is a critical component of our education system. Unfortunately, you develop it and build it as you go. You can't have it done today and then say, okay, now it's all done. So there are students who will go to those schools that are lesser endowed, if you will. And but nevertheless, we continue to build upon that so that we can establish the infrastructure. Danson,
I won't ask you which one you went to, but just following up on what he said, even schools that perhaps he's talking about the sunny side of it, that you can still develop grit and character in some of these less funded schools, but the ministry is talking about that 100% transition. Do you see that happening? And what would you say about the concerns that parents have in terms of, this is really going to be a critical building block in terms of the potential of their kids going forward? It's how you perform in secondary school is going to talk about your transition then to, college and or university, and then their life prospects.
Well, Anna, this is one sector that I've been more than in the legal profession. The schools I went to were village schools. One in my village was a primary school called Nyamira Primary, then Kiabonyo Secondary School, where accidentally we went through with the current Minister for Education, Dr. Matiang'i. We went through there. He went to Kisii High School. I went to a private school in Form 5 called Muguga. Then we met again.
Good class, eh?
Fantastic. Then we met again in KU, trained as a bachelor, as a graduate of education, taught for 14 years, rose to that point of being a deputy head. That time there were no principals, so I could be attending today. Had I not changed career to law, I could still be attending that selection of students in Form 1. So I really understand the process as a trained teacher, as a teacher that has practiced. What we are facing, one, let us deal with the question of national schools. National schools during our time were purely schools that were producing science-based students who will pursue careers in the science world. Then there were art-based schools, most of them who could not be able to raise laboratories. So very many of the people in the legal profession, in other professions, accounting and the others, went to those schools. So parents didn't have a problem. So if your child is science-oriented, national school. If your child is can go to any public school.
What is Nini?
I mean, there was nothing like...
What is that? You mean is an arts-based or, yeah?
It used to be called that. That is how it was derogatory, that those guys who didn't go to national schools, they were seen as to be Nini and nakadhalika. Today, we have a new concept in education called you have got to have a holistic child. A holistic child is a person who has the academic realm, the cognitive aspect of a child, the psychomotor aspect, that is the physical aspect of the child, the aesthetic value, for example, things like disciplines like music, art, drawing and design, all these things are coming now. With the digitalization of the market, the competition now is that the school the child goes determines the career that child goes to do. So the amount of input a parent wants to put to a child in terms of buying textbooks, in terms of paying and bribing heads to get admission to national schools, is because of where will the child go. The competition that was at that time was competition that was based on national resources. Today the competition is global. We are having, the president has said, people from Uganda come. You'll get an automatic visa.
That's true.
The labor market has come globalized. So the question that we see is what the deputy president has always said, that he came from a hustler area. He came from a hustler school called Kapsabit to be the deputy president. While in the Plato theory and in the Aristotle theory is that nobility was based on the type of education one got. If you want to be a lawyer, you must have come from this area. To make it so simple, what I'm seeing the parents are facing now is one, the clustering of those schools. Will a child in my village, in Nyabite village, in a school where there's only one BOG teacher, compete with a child at Alliance High School, at Kenya High School, where every teacher has the best qualification and the resources to deliver? So the question of inequality is the issue. The exam is one. The mode of testing is one, regardless of the facilities and the infrastructure that child used to for 4 years. So that is why you're seeing this craze that parents are saying, my child must be in a national school. This has been addressed under the current constitution. That is why devolution came in. That devolve national schools to the counties. Today, we have 102 national schools spread across every county. My appeal is that we have got to change from this old mentality of looking at Alliance, of looking at Kenya High, and put the governors, because every governor has resources to develop those, to put into those national schools.
Okay.
As much as the national government pushes resources to the counties, the assembly that is locally based, the county assembly, has the power to allocate resources within their counties. So it is upon us to move away from looking at Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto to be the people to develop, even when we have our resources at our disposal. So in my own view, devolution is a cure to education.
Fair enough. Hold that thought. I can see everyone eager to debate that. But let's just take a look at what's happening across the country in respect to this. The Form 1 selection in the county and sub-county schools. Laura Otieno is standing by for us from Kisumu. And good morning to you. Laura, what can you tell us about this selection this morning?
Well, thank you very much, Anne, and a good morning to you. And here in Kisumu, indeed, according to what the County Director of Education told us, Madam Sabina, that the selection for Form 1s for the county schools and extra county schools are expected to start today. Well, it's a slow morning for them. They have not yet quite started the process. The teachers are still coming in, and of course, there are a few logistical challenges prompting them to change the venue from where we are right now. She informed us that they changed the venue last minute to the Kisumu Girls High School, so of course we'll be moving there, but this has been the place since time immemorial where Form 1 elections have been taking place. Now she has told us that she herself has not even gotten there yet. She's still coordinating a few things before she gets to that venue, but some of the issues that were highlighted, we have been having this conversation ever since the selections for the national schools kicked off, and the major thing that is arising is that parents specifically are very enthusiastic about the whole thing, saying that the declaration, there are 1,054,000 positions for Form 1, ensuring 100% transition was one of the things that they saw as a plus in this election this time round, and also saying that this election has come in quite handy in good time. It will give them enough time to be planning to plan their finances for their children who will be going into Form 1. And we have been speaking also to other stakeholders in the industry. We have seen KUPPET and KEPSHA coming up with issues, citing challenges, especially in ensuring that there's quality education given at the end of the day after that transition is made. We had seen some schools receiving money to basically pump up their facilities, add more classes to ensure that there's quality education. So it's quite an interesting thing to watch how that will be turning out. Of course, we will be going to that very venue where the selection will be taking place to see how that process is ongoing, and of course we'll be bringing you the latest from that side. And 2018, Anne, is quite an interesting sector to watch in terms of education. You know that the new curriculum is set to be rolled out from next year after the pilot had been running for the better quarter of this year. The last quarter of this year, the pilot for the new curriculum had been set out, and we expect that to be rolled from January, of course, for standard 1 pupils, rather, not Form 1. But that, in a nutshell, will be quite interesting to see with the education reforms that the CS had been pushing forth. It will be quite something to be looking at in terms of education, not only in Kisumu but across the country. Now, Kisumu Girls is the national school that was the national school in this county, and of course other major schools include Njiko Boys. Now, we understand that the selection is done in a way that there's the schools that are considered major schools, or rather giant schools, including the Kisumu Girls, Njiko Boys, Kisumu Boys, will pick their selections first, and then where they leave from is where the other schools will now be picking up to make their selections as well. Of course, all in light of 100% transition of KCP candidates to all go into Form 1. And
thanks, Laura, for that update for us this morning. And let's just pick it up from where she's left about, 100% transition. And of course, all parents are excited about that. The question is whether we'll get 100% learning to come in with that, and whether these schools are properly equipped to do that. What is your own thought about it, Amos? Whilst the government is quite, aggressive about this, is part of the pledge, must deliver, are we able to handle it starting Jan?
Thank you, Anne. This is very good news, because the government seeks to comply with what the constitutional requirement is in the Basic Education Act of 2013, provides for free and compulsory basic education. And the Basic Education Act even goes further to define what basic education is, which is a continuous 12 years of continuous uninterrupted schooling. And so is a good and a bold move that the government is seeking to ensure that all children have got slots. Now, unfortunately, providing slots is not enough to say that you have 100% transition, because there's the issue of being given a position and there's the issue of taking it up. So whether we still have the capacity for all these children to go to school is something else altogether. And basing on what the government is providing, the pathway to how the government was to achieve 100% transition is, 1, provide slots to all the children. Number 2, declare free day secondary education. But if you look at the circular that was released on the 19th of October, it still leaves out 4 critical cost elements that are left to parents. Number 1, it has got everything to do with the uniform. Now, on average, a parent spends close to 7,000 for uniform. Then number 2, it leaves the responsibility of lunch to parents. Now, assume that you want to provide a very of the basic meal, which is just a mixture of maize and beans to children. It will cost about 70 shillings per day. Now, a term is made of close to 100 days. So you're saying that on average, a parent has to spend about 14,000 on lunch alone for the whole year. So add the 7,000, come and bring in the other 14,000. That's already 21,000. Then there are also other cost elements that the government has not dealt with, what we've previously cried of, that schools are introducing additional levies, because the main challenge towards transition has been the issue of levies. It is giving the leeway to the boards of management for the schools to charge for infrastructure and other things. So it means that you're still leaving parents with a burden of over 25,000. So if you consider that most of the parents who take their children to day schools don't have ability to pay, then it means that you're still going to lock them out. Now, honestly, if you sit here with me, Kaburu, and Wakili Danstan Omari here, and you're giving our children 20,000, honestly, Wakili and I can actually meet in Serena and finish that money within 3 days. Whereas that other child in Nyabiti or Chekalini, where I come from, has no ability to pay this additional 23,000. So I think the issue which Wakili mentioned, the issue of inequality, is the single most challenge towards achieving 100% transition. That we ought to have a mechanism that ensures that parents who don't have ability are able to be facilitated. Whether it's a bursary system, whether it's a voucher system, we're able to deal with it. So that all these children who've been given slots are able to access those opportunities. Because if they don't access them, it becomes a serious challenge. Then number 2 is the issue of preference. You looked at the dailies yesterday. And children, the issue of preference and ability to go to a certain school. And I want to give this practical example. You're somewhere in Suba, or let's say you're somewhere in Kakuma, in Turkana. Your child has been called to Mandera High School, which is a national school. Look at the reality of you coming from that place. So for you to come from Kakuma, to come to Lodwar, to come to Lokicha, to Kitale, Eldoret, Nairobi, Garissa, Wajir, to reach Mandera, how much fare do you require? So it's a question of also whether parents are also willing to. Sometimes you really want to take your children to those places, but look at what happened 2 years ago when a serious insecurity challenge in the northeastern. So if today really, if where I see today, and I speak for majority of the parents, if your child is called to certain places, most likely some parents will not take them there. So the fact of the matter is that selection is one thing, but now selection is now about to start. Forget about what the government has done.
I think
people will be lining up in schools to go to particular schools, and even schools are aware. Today, if you walk into any school, they already have a form for people who will apply, because we've seen that 60% of children, whenever they are selected to schools, they don't end up joining those schools. So there are a lot of intricate and complications around ensuring that 100% transition is feasible and achievable.
On two issues. One, he's raised very fundamental issues about the question of education is not only tuition. Tuition is the fees you pay to cater for academic purposes. Under the education, there are very many other entries. That's what he said, which account, according to him, to 25,000 per term. The question that is there is, what is the role of a parent in the education of their own children? The United Nations Convention for the Rights of the Child demand that education be provided by two people, the government and the parent.
You need to look at the Basic Education
Act, I'm moving.
And it clarifies the role of the parent and the role of the government.
I've started from the International UN Convention. Coming down, the UNESCO, the convention that deals specifically for education, has been domesticated in our Children's Act and in the Basic Education Act.
And the Constitution, Article 43?
In Article 43 of the Constitution, not Article 43, but Article 53 of the Constitution talks about free
and compulsory
compulsory education. When you look also from Article 4 and Article 3 of the Constitution, some rights are progressive. For example, the question of education is a continuous improvement, and it will continue improving for millions and millions of years to come, depending on availability of resources and the capacity of the state to provide that. So under the principle parents per child, that the state is the bigger parent, the state must provide. So let us look at this question. Has the state provided free tuition fees? Just a minute.
I think, and we are politicizing this issue when we
it's not politicizing.
Politicize it.
Education, what is the role of a parent?
But let me ask,
let
me just ask Danson this, because you yourself talked about inequality earlier, and the reality is, if you're talking about 63% of our kids going there, majority of this country is living in poverty, is struggling to put a basic meal on the table. And while you are right to say that parents must play an active role in the education of their children, after all, they are their children first, there is a very real limiting challenge for the majority of Kenyans to be able to do that even if they wanted to. So past free tuition, past the 6 is it textbooks that you'll be getting, would you agree that the government needs to do a little more to help the poorest of the poor to be able to take advantage of that free secondary?
Or look at an alternative model.
That way. The government's intervention, one, universally for everybody, free tuition. 2, the government intervention in order to deal with the marginalized, the groups that cannot raise fees. Government has set up mechanisms, for example, bursary systems. The bursary systems are almost in every sector. The member of parliament has that facility. The women rep has that facility. The county government has that facility. The Senate is the only group that doesn't have that facility. That is one sector. Number 2, the alternative government called the church comes in to supplement activities in the education sector. The church provides that area. 3rd, the corporate sector. My business community friends here, most of them under the corporate social responsibility have developed foundations to assist these children. So it is a totality of everybody to put government there. Then, within the school itself, it offers bursaries. Schools have their own resources to offer bursary. So, where we are, we can't only now be discussing that it is government to provide for us. It is the totality of everybody to raise up this question. And the only problem to me, and I've said it very clearly, I'm not holding forth for any government or for any ministry. I'm only saying that we developed a notion, a perspective of Serikali's idea. Number two, we have raised this issue. You've raised the question about, will a child who comes from a poor community succeed going to Alliance High School? Let me give you an example. Today, that child who has 400 marks, if he's called to a day school, the parents will not have fees. That parent is on the road looking for a place at Mango High. Mango High, the cost is over 100,000.
It is not.
I'm saying, whatever it is.
We have to give
I don't want to, let me not spoil
53,000 to be precise.
If that letter is given to that parent, the 53,000 will be paid. Where does that 53,000 come? But that amount of 5,000 will not be raised. So it's a question of attitude that in this school, the policy is you pay before you come. Parents look for that money. They look for from their relatives, they'll do what? But that child must be in school. So, in my own view, and with the experience I have, the type of school determines whether the parent will want to pay fees or will want to say.
Let me allow Amos a right of reply. But Amos, as you do that, perhaps you could talk a little bit more about what you think the government can do extra, especially for the poorest of the poor. Obviously, there's a bursary system. I mean, it's been riddled with its own challenges, accusations of, nepotism and corruption in how it's allocated, etc. But that notwithstanding, you talked about a very interesting concept of a voucher system or innovating within that situation. So tell us about that.
Thank you, Anne. I think I don't want to give a blanket condemnation. But the problem I have sometimes talking to lawyers is that they look at things from a very legalistic point of view.
They look at it from two sides.
From a very, very legalistic point of view. I think we're talking about very serious issues, and we don't need to politicize them. Number two, we need to agree that the government has done a lot.
Thank you.
What we need to agree, and I have participated in discussions and even critical analysis of looking at the future of funding and financing education in Kenya. Now, in the last 5 years, you need to realize, Dunston, that this government has moved direct financing from 169 billion in education to 359 billion by last year. It's a lot of resources. However, the future is bleak. It's bleak in what way? The population is growing. By 2030, we are talking about an enrollment of 24 million children into the school. That requires an investment of 859 billion per year for us to finance education. So this leaves some of us in education financing with one question. Is this sustainable? Definitely the answer is that it is not sustainable. And so the cure to many of these challenges that we are facing is to look at a model that works. And the model that works is not to politicize education by saying that you are going to provide free education. But you have to look at the components that you would use an innovative approach. For instance, do you need the so-called national schools? Why would you put 70% of the resources in the national schools and leave 30% to the remaining schools? Why don't you redistribute these resources? You will have money. Number two, who should the government finance? There are specific components, as we've agreed, that the government needs to finance. Redefine what is the role of the parents, so that you don't tell parents that when children go to school, it will be free. Then when now you release a circular, you tell parents, you'll pay for lunch, you'll pay for uniform. We will ask one question. What is the role of the uniform? Are we putting on uniform because we went to school when we were putting on uniform? Number two, how much time should children spend in school? Why wouldn't you start classes at 6 and finish classes at 1 so that children go home? You don't need to pay for lunch. Where was it written that education should be taking place between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m.? I go to Addis Ababa and you walk on the streets. You go to Rwanda, you'll see it. Children work in the morning up to noon, then they go to school in the afternoon. Others go to the school in the morning and so that the same resources are shared. So what we are saying is that there are innovative approaches of ensuring that every child can get an education. Otherwise, we should be careful enough not just to look at these things from a legal point of view, that the government has done this, the government has not done that, but look at what is sustainable. There is a lot of money, as you've mentioned, within the private sector, but then how do you make sure that the private sector participates in it? If you go to London, for instance, London sorted out this problem because the private sector had a lot of money that they wanted to invest in education. But look at what happens in Kenya. Safaricom is so frustrated because if they want to invest in the government, they're not very sure of how they'll get value for their money. And that's why they'll spend more than 1 billion in the M-Pesa Academy Foundation. Imagine if all that money found its way into the public system. And how will it work? If Safaricom has a good model, Safaricom should be given to manage 50 public schools. Because the challenge that we have in our public sector is the issue of management. If you go to a government hospital, KNH, which is
should they be given to manage it, or should government learn from it and adopt?
Maybe, I don't want to open that can of worms, but I'm just saying that, yes, I'm just trying to say that what we need to do is to look at innovative ways. And I'll give an example. If you look at a state-owned corporation around communication, it has got all the resources. If Royal Media Services was given such resources, you will see wonders. That is the example that I'm giving. So as Anne is putting, can we look at how can we learn from the private sector so that we move away from this adversarial nature of competition between private and public and look at a complementary,
and county,
yes, we look at a complementary system. So I want Danson to know that that's the confines which I'm talking about. I'm not blaming any government. The government has done a lot, moving from 73% to 86% transition rate. The Jubilee government has done extremely well as far as education is concerned.
But more needs
much
to be
more
done.
than needs to be done.
Point.
We don't need to politicize
Steve.
Yeah, I love the fact that he has his stats together. He can explain the numbers and accurate numbers as such. However, we always seem to have a mishmash of information that's given at the same time, and you end up leaving not knowing exactly where do we go from here. I think the government has an opportunity to continue looking at ways to improve. We acknowledge the fact that a lot has been done in the education sector. And one of the things that we must appreciate is the fact that Kenya stands distinct in the world because of our education system. It's not perfect. It's not that great compared to larger economies such as the United States. However, it has made a difference. A Kenyan can work in any part of the world and thrive because of the basic education we got here. So we need to continue building on that. The other thing, of course, is look at these things apolitically, so that you're not criticizing the current Minister for Education or criticizing the government, but saying, what can we do? Because at the end of the day, matters not who's in office, but what do we have for our people? Now, in terms of sustainability, there's an assumption that everything stays stagnant. We expect and hope that the country and the economy grows, and therefore this 859 billion will be available. But there's a lot of work to be done. There's even the question of vouchers. And do all Kenyans qualify for vouchers if they're taking their kids to private schools, or they choose to take a child to a nearer school than where they are called? So there's a lot of discussion and debate, but one that should be done with a view to develop our options and our opportunities in the education sector. I think that presents a great opportunity for growth. And that is also part of the economy and business, etc.
All right, wait. Everyone is looking at me like, right of reply. I'm going to give it to you very shortly. We're taking a short break on Citizen Extra. We're back with more after this. Stay with us.